So before we start, a little bit of an introduction. My name is Sharif Ahmed. I'm the current chair of the Paynesville Foundation. And I'm a first-generation immigrant. Came over here to Minnesota in 1977 with plans to stay only 4 years, and now it's been 48 years. Magically, fast forward, here I am. I was trained as an engineer, then I switched on the business side. I learned a lot from the process, and I've been blessed with a wide array of friends and neighbors and friends, and Minnesota just stuck with me. So much so that I fell in love with my beautiful wife. We got married. We got 3 girls. They are all doing fine, and a brand new grandson, which is just about 2 years old. And with that, I'll turn it over.
I'm Christine Frank. I am Director of Operations and HR for CommunityGiving. I have been with the organization for about 8 years. Come from a background of healthcare and retail leadership, and just really want to get back into a role that my work empowered greater community impact, and so left the retail world for community giving.
Good. So we were talking about resilience, so I thought I'd start with, what is resilience? And of course, the dictionary says it's an ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. And if you look at the tiny little plant on the left-hand side, what are the chances? Somehow, some bird, some wind, brought over a seed, and the plant found a way to really anchor, and against all odds is doing the best it can. It will probably never be a sequoia tree, but it's still a tree and is doing the best it can with the circumstances. So it's really about, the way I see it, it's to cutting out the T and change I can't do it to I can do it. And that's what it's about. It is about change. So then the question comes, what is change? And of course, change is, anything different. You can transform, you can adjust, you can adapt, you can modify, you can revise. Too many things, and pretty soon you might say, I don't really know what change is. It just is. It sounds like it's about everything. Well, change is the one constant in life. It really happens every day, every moment. So if you go ahead and look at, it can be as simple as changing a light bulb, or we all know about the changes of the time. Or here in Minnesota, we now are in spring and summer, which is the road construction season. You're going to see a lot of detours. But if you look at the top side of that slide, changes could be in your focus, in the values, activities, business, success. It's really everything. And if you pause and think about even the sun and the moon, the sun never ever rises in the same real location every day. It's constantly changing. So life itself is change. So if you're thinking about resilience, Bugs Bunny will say, well, I can learn from my mistakes, and pretty soon I'll be a genius. I've done my share of mistakes, and that's not the desired part. I've also been a Boy Scout, and so I like the Boy Scout motto of being prepared. So I'm going to ask, you can go through a few things.
So, part of making mistakes versus being prepared is kind of gauging those known versus those unknown changes. We all, know that our board chair is going to change after the term is up. What we don't know is if they're going to pass away or something unexpected is going to happen. And just really being able to identify and be aware of both those type of changes will help us prepare and be resilient. Some examples, at Community Giving, we had, like I said, that unexpected board chair transition where we had a board chair that was starting July 1. We were super excited, and he passed away unexpectedly. What do? Do you ask a former board chair to step in? Do you find somebody new, how do you handle that, and kind of having contingency plans in mind. There's, a conflict of interest. A board member changes, has a job change, and we didn't know about it, and all of a sudden, this conflict of interest that they signed off on didn't include that new change. Economic changes coming, some just community events. Maybe we've had a trail derailment, or the whole adapting to COVID, all those different pieces that we experience. Some of those things we can predict, and they're known that they're happening, and some are unknown. Sharif has a good example of adapting and being resilient between a known and an unknown change at the same time.
Paynesville, this was last year, I had a session with my doctor, and she told me that I needed a surgery, and that was in August. And we had a gala planned, which was coming up in early September, and I met with the surgeon, and I says, yeah, can it wait till after the surgery? And they looked at me in a strange way, why do you want to wait? And I said, well, I don't want to miss the fun. But I think it was something that they were able to do that, so I scheduled that. So that was the known one. The unknown one, unfortunately, exactly 2 weeks before our gala, our executive director passed away. Exactly 2 weeks. And for all of you who have been part of foundations and galas, you know that the vortex of activity happens right around 2-3 weeks before. So that was a complete complete gut punch. And so I'll talk about that later on. But things happen that you may know or you may not know, and I think I said in Kathleen's session earlier, you talked about resilience and planning. A lot of the stuff that you talked about here you're going to see in terms of how they played out for us. So
with the tactical pieces.
Yeah.
All right, so as we're looking at these different examples, there's some common traits that kind of come out that we all use to be resilient. One of them is strategic adaptability. And what that is just creating and implementing strategies that allow for flexibility and allow for you to be responsive and to pivot when you need to. Some of the things that we try to really encourage both in our boards and our staff is cross-training on tasks, so that you don't have just a single person that knows how to print the checks. You don't have a single person that knows how to take the board minutes or make those connections there. Redundancy in technology. I don't know if anybody noticed, last week Zoom had an issue and went down for a few hours. For our team, we had them pivot and used Microsoft Teams. We had a backup redundancy plan just in case for that. And just being really clear in our processes, what the outcomes and the checkpoints are. That doesn't mean we have to always do the process exactly the same way, but knowing where we can be flexible and where we need to be a little bit more rigid in those pieces. With risk management, just identifying potential risks that are out there, and prioritizing which risks are likely to happen, which ones aren't, creating plans to be able to adapt. Like you talked about, what are potential changes affecting our donors, our organization, our communities? What are the things that we can plan for, and what are the things that we can't? We learned a real tough lesson. We had our server go down about 4 years ago. And it was a global event, and we were out of our server for a month. How do you make work happen in that time? We figured it out, and now we have a plan. And hopefully never have to worry about that. And then the third thing that really plays into resiliency and helping make your board resilient and your staff is leadership and communication. Having effective leadership that allows for open communication. board members understanding what their roles are and where communication needs to happen. When I ask myself these questions, and when I'm coaching a new teammate and getting them onboarded, I always say, who would find this information helpful? Who's part of the decision? And who might provide insight? And that's where my email goes. And I try to coach the team on approaching all of their communication that way.
Okay, so when you think about the tangible ways to put the elements of real resilience into practice, there are 5 main really components. And I see it as how you sail, because you can't really control the wind, you can't change the direction, but you can adjust the sails to go which way you're going. So in terms of, what does it mean for the board really needs to be in a position, no matter what happens outside your control, to be able to adapt. And in that, there are 5 key things. It's about governance, it's about board composition, it's about engagement with the board, it's about the best practices, and using all the resources and support. And I'm going to go through one by one what those are. So starting with governance, if I look at the overall, what is the structure? Governance is almost like, when I use the example of the boat, it's like the helm. It's like the pilot's room, right? The bridge of the sailboat. What's the structure? Are we having a good structure within the organization? Are people sure about their roles and responsibilities? There are some compliance things we've got to be sure. Is there a plan for the future for the organization? And sometimes it's not intuitive. Are we aligned with the strategy? We all do a strategy session, and if the strategy says we are going north to Canada, and you go forward 6 months, and then you find out you're actually headed south, well, you're doing a lot of activity, but I think you got to check it every so often. Are you in real alignment with the strategy? And do you have a healthy organization? What I mean by healthy organization, no organization, whether it's corporate or whether it's a foundation, if you don't have open communication, it's not as productive and healthy. And for a nonprofit, when you have a foundation, the board members, they all joined with some expectations. Are you meeting those real expectations? So as part of the governance work, you got to make sure that you're thinking about all those and every so often checking those. That's really important. If you're thinking about board really composition, there are also 4 things. There's about membership of the board, their roles and responsibilities. Do they know what they're supposed to do? There's about education and training. And then does it reflect the community? That's also important. So when I'm talking about membership, I'll talk a little bit more. Are all the roles filled? If it's not filled, then it's an obvious gap. I know in Paynesville a year back, we didn't have a vice chair role filled. So in really hindsight, we went and fixed that last late summer. And that was absolutely critical when we had to deal with the gala and so on and so forth. How do you invite people to join the board? I've been part of many organizations, and in some organizations, 1 or 2 people go and pick the people, and they show up and they join the board. Well, okay, that's one way. But we went and looked at actually who the members are within the board. We actually looked at what is the selection criteria. Do we have a list of candidates? Because as people come and go, do you start from scratch, or do you have a list that has been going on? And what's the process of nominating a board member? Every person who's involved with the foundation, even outsiders, should be able to nominate somebody. And then, once you go through the process, how do you select and then how do you make it official? Those are all part of the membership process. And then the second piece of the board really composition is the roles and responsibilities. We didn't have written roles. This last year was the first year and a half that we became a full partner foundation. And I suspect some of the foundation might be in their role. We have been successful. And as you become a full partner foundation, there's a lot of different things we're going to make sure that we're doing right. So we went back and we actually wrote down the roles and the jobs. Why did we do that? Because we went and talked to prospective board members or even committee members, and the first question they asked, well, tell me, what am I supposed to do? And how much time will I need? And what does it really mean? And I thought it was important that if the same question get asked of 3 board members, they all have the same answer. And if you don't really write it down, and 3 people gives you 3 completely different answers, then I think the red flag should go up on any prospective member's mind that, you're not quite sure. Boards and committee roles. I think committees are a great way to bring in new people into the foundation. They don't all really have to join the board, but I think if they're in a committee, it gives the board a chance to get to know the folks, and also truly vice versa. I'm going to talk a little bit more on the last bullet, succession planning and tenure tracking. Succession planning is so critical, like Christine said, because if you haven't thought through who the next folks are that's going to take their role, then it may come as a surprise. You have no idea what's going to happen from a day and a day to now. Some organizations have a well-defined structure. They have a president, they have a vice president, which becomes a president, then they have a president nominee. There are different ways of doing that, but it's important to think about that. And along with that, there's also the other side. We have members that have been founding members. They're the stalwarts of the community, stalwarts of the foundation. What happens if they're not there? How does that work? And so then the question of tenure tracking comes in. I think within CG, we have 3-year terms, and I think you can serve 3 terms, would be total 9 years. And then after 9 years, you have to step off the board. But if you want to come back, you can come back after that, right? So, but just by having that date and the name is visible, 2 things happen. It gives the board member a clear indication of where the timing is. It also tells the government's team, which one should be looking at. And so it's a very, very planning tool. And now I have met one other organization where all the nominations and all the selections was being done by one person. And he picked the entire board, and everybody just backed off. And so I'm thinking, and I talked to them, and I said, now, how do you deal with that? Why, we're not sure how to deal with that. And I thought, well, if you're tenure tracking, that would take care of itself. But, so it's an important point. And then education.
Education. So part of having a healthy, functional board is giving them the education that they need, starting with the onboarding. It's really setting the foundation for the basics of what they're going to need to know about the role, the organization, and what the goals are and how things are getting done. We always start off with a board orientation, or try to get that in. It's about a half day of training. We go over the roles and the goals within the organization, the basic functions of what is the board's responsibility and what are the processes that we support and can help out with, and just, having that understanding of individual roles and what those around them can do, so you don't inadvertently have 2 people working on the same thing or somebody going rogue, so to speak. Making education part of the meeting structures and making it ever present, because there's changes in what's going on, what we can do, and just keeping everybody informed and on the same page. And then there's always ongoing opportunities. We do, there's webinars, there's conferences like this. Some organizations, like we'll have a board portal that I say is for that 2 a.m. discovery, that question that I'm just dying to know about the spend policy. I can find it there and sharing that out with the team. And then just networking and peer collaboration. Sharif has gone to some other board meetings outside of the Paynesville board just to see how they work, and they've learned from each other, and we just try to encourage that networking and learning from each other as much as possible.
The next one is the board reflecting the community. Now that, to me, it's extremely important, because if the foundation is supposed to cater to the community, you got to have an understanding of the community. And as we heard today in the session, that doesn't really fully happen till the voice of the community is heard within the deliberations of the board. And so when I talk about diversity, I'm not talking about just race. I'm talking about professions. I'm talking about gender, age, ethnicity, experiences. And so what we did at Paynesville, we actually drew up a matrix of our board, and we looked at who are the current board members in all those categories. And so as we recruit new really board members, it becomes a lot more really intentional. Currently, we know we don't have anybody from the healthcare community, so we're looking at that. We don't have anybody from the faith community. We are actually looking at that. And that's already geared to bring in the voice of the community within our deliberations so that we get an accurate reading of what the needs are within that. And then for the board engagement.
Some of the big questions we like to ask ourselves is, are we tapping into the skills of the board members? Do we have a marketing professional on our board? Are they helping us out with insights and trends? Do we have a professional advisor, and are we working with them and collaborating with them, finding out what they need? Have we, are we asking them to make, introductions to potential donors? Are we, as a staff? Does everyone know? Are we meeting their why? Sorry. Have we asked our board members why they want to be on the board? Are we meeting their needs and their purposes for being part of our board? And just, does everyone know how they can engage their passion within their board role?
And the one that I think is important, because it sometimes is not stated clearly. If you are in a board, I think it's okay to ask and state that we hope that you make this foundation one of the top 3 for your personal giving. Because in my mind, of course, you're giving your time and your talent. And if you believe in the cause, which obviously you do, why wouldn't you make this one of your top 3? And just by stating that, I've had some very good conversations with folks. They do appreciate that, just to have that acknowledgement and to ask for that. So, and then the best practices. When I said, when we had that mishap 2 weeks before our gala last year, I sat down and thought about, how do we handle this? And we actually had an emergency meeting, and we had committees drawn out, and we empowered the committees, and it was really beautiful to see how they played out. Every committee had a role. They were empowered to make really decisions. They were given some budgets if they needed that. And the marching order was, don't wait to come back and ask for permission. You do what you think is best. We all know what the goal was. And that really worked very, very well. They did absolutely. The entire organization came in together. So I thought of that. I thought, it's almost like a orchestra. Every musician plays an instrument, but if you don't have the music sheet, they all will play some instrument, but it won't go really together. So it was really good. The other piece is the skill sets. There are a lot of skill sets, and Christine talked about that. There are a lot of skill sets within the foundation, and are we going back to checking to make sure that they're using those skill sets within their foundation work? Because if you're able to do that, then the next thing happens, then they get really excited. You can ignite their passion. I've met a lot of people that says, "Oh, I'm busy, I don't have time." That's common. But I've never met anybody that says, "I really, really love to do this," and somehow magically they find time for it. That's always the case. And so taking the time to find out what is it that they're looking for. And I'm a firm believer in drinking a lot of coffee with the board members, just in a one-on-one. Because you show up in a board meeting, you meet, you have a meeting for 2 hours, you go home. You think you know them, but you're not quite sure. It's when you get to know them personally, and you talk and you debate, and that's where I think real understanding happens, and that's really helpful. And then the alignment with the executive director.
For those boards that are fortunate enough to have an executive director, and in our situation with community giving, the executive director really acts as the bridge between the board and the organization, and keeping alignment and keeping everybody rowing in the same direction. It's important that your executive director is connecting and communicating. And really, their purpose is to have a clear understanding of the overall vision of what the board wants to see happen, and setting the tasks and making those things happen. Speaking of additional supports and resources, within community giving, we have a shared services model that just allows the local teams to really focus on their community and still have that depth of expertise available. So the boards aren't having to print the checks and do those pieces. We carry that load for those in our partnerships, and just other organizations are there to help with in that way also. We look to community partners, who has skills and capacities and wants to help your community foundation during this time. We had done, the Central Minnesota Community Foundation had done community connection, kind of with the intent of educating donors on what some different nonprofits were doing in our communities around a specific topic, like housing or food scarcity. And they would invite in a couple of nonprofits to talk about what they were doing with donors, and a spillover benefit that they weren't expecting. These nonprofits learned that they were doing a lot of the same things, but nonprofit A was doing one piece better, and nonprofit B was doing another piece better. And so out of those type of community connection meetings, those nonprofits have worked together and are referring each other back and forth to each other's strengths. And so just, looking at, we don't have to do it all. There's a whole community around us. Another fun collaboration is on technology. When we do our Dancing with Our Stars event, United Way helps us with the text to give, because that's a technology we only need at one time a year. So for a nonprofit, that's not a wise investment, but because they use it on a regular basis, they let us partner with them to use that tool. And just, thinking broader, we got to see lots of good resources from MCN, MCF, Propel, our MICF, Minnesota Independent Community Foundations met earlier. There's just a network of resources out there for everybody to tap into.
So I'm at the tail end of my chairmanship for Paynesville, and what I've seen, the value of networking and sharing and engaging has been tremendous. I've talked to other foundations, very, very willing, capable people to share their ideas and knowledge. And sometimes it might seem like it's too big, it's too much. It's where do I start? And I would say, don't worry about where to start. Just start. Just pick one. And wonderful things happen. When you succeed in one, you get energized, you go on to the next one. And so the CG staff I found to be tremendous resource. I have personally talked to probably 4 or 5 other executive directors. They're all really very helpful. And in conferences like this, hopefully you made a lot of connections, and we'll be able to use that. So with that, I think we're done. What questions do you have?
So sometimes I think in terms of resilience, we can consider all of the structural things, but in terms of board members, sometimes the energy is just like out of the room, or the tanks are empty, and we have this kind of habit of asking people who serve a lot, and they, who gets on one of our foundation boards? The people that are involved in like 10 other boards, and they're giving a lot to the community. So what advice do you have, and maybe others as well, for maintaining, helping the people that are involved in this maintain that resilience for themselves and stay engaged and enthusiastic?
Well, I'll take just a part of that. When I started my role, I wanted to know the community. So I linked up with the executive director, and we started having coffees with a lot of local organizations. I actually went and visited our service center, Food Shelf, and talked to the organizers there. I went and visited with the Lions, different organizations. And that helped me anchor of same town, same needs, but different people looking at different perspectives, right? So I thought that was helpful. And then I also went and talked to the folks who have been with the foundation for a long time, and to see what they have seen, what the journey has been. So that has been helpful. And I can tell you, our executive director actually talked a lot more than I did. And it was a simple conversation of tell me more about the foundation. What do you know about the foundation, and what is your opinion? Are we doing the right thing, and where do you want us to see go? So that kind of feedback helped both ways. Anybody else?
I don't know. I was just going to say, from the sense of resilience within the board, just checking in on each other. Where are you at? And giving the space for people to say, no, I can't do that at this time, and building that kind of culture, like making it okay to say no.
In answer to your question, I always find when the energy's not in the room that there's a reason for it. And so I think every time people show up to our board meetings, they can bring neutral, positive, or negative energy with them. And usually when boards are focused on just the content of the work, as opposed to the relationship and purpose and meaning of the work, that it just diminishes the positive energy in the room. So it might take normal positive energy and shift it to neutral. And so I always pay attention to certain intangible things. Meaning making, why are we here? Why does it matter? Why does it matter to them individually? Why does it matter to the organization? Why does it matter to the community? Those kind of linking up, those kind of connections, they change the energy in the room. So I use energy actually as a diagnostic for the health of the board, for example, or the organization. But the question I'm curious from our 2 presenters is, what are some of the things that are less, that are So you've presented a lot of really great material here on kind of the content, structure, and knowledge of what we should be paying attention to and processes. But sometimes behind this is some kind of small intuitive practice that you engage in that actually has great power to build resilience in the board. And I'm curious if you are aware of, is it your coffee conversations, for example, and or, you know, what surfaces for you when I ask that question?
So for me, the board members all have one vote, right? But they all come with different backgrounds, different experiences, different style of communication, and I go out of my way to make sure that everybody speaks. And as an organization, and now I'm talking broadly, fostering a climate and an environment where it's okay to disagree. And if you disagree, it's okay to have debate over it, but once you reach a decision as a board that you support it, right? That's really important. I think it is important to, as you work on your committees, that you empower them to make decisions and you support them without removing responsibility. So they say they're going to do something, they're really accountable for it, and I think you're there to help and support without removing responsibility. Now, stepping back a little bit, going back to my previous role on when I was working global role, we had global teams. We used to meet once a quarter, about 40 people in different parts of the world, and it never failed where we would meet, and as we started talking, these are guys from 15 different countries. And every time we were having a conversation, anything that really came up, the Americans were very vocal. And I'm generalizing, the Germans would usually stick to what they said, and that's the only way to work. And the Japanese and the Chinese would be very quiet in the corner. And then I found a way to make sure that everybody spoke and just wonderful things really happened because ideas doesn't have a corner on anybody. And so one way I did that, why I like the coffee, is I started scheduling the meetings the day really before it starts. So we start in the late afternoon. And then I would have planned dinners that were picked, completely cross-pollinated, because usually all the Chinese will go out and all the Americans will go out to dinner, and I said no. So completely mixed up. And there's something magical about a very fine dinner with lots of liquor. Good things happen. And I saw that the next day they would show up and they all knew each other and the communication and the style and all. So fostering communication and open and honest conversation and the last thing I would say is shared values. And the shared values for a corporation, for me, it was a shared goal, but I'm assuming for a foundation it's also a shared goal and a shared value. That all brought the team really together in my mind. You have something to add?
Thank you both. I think being on probably too many boards, one element that I'm not sure if you've mentioned is you've talked about education, but not educating about how the board works. I think bringing in somebody different, to bring in a visitor, and to allow the board member to see a different way, I think is a real interesting, because sometimes it gets too internalized. That's point one. I shouldn't say this. I just became a member of the Stearns County Soil and Water Conservation Board. It's the most boring board meeting I've ever been into in my life. I'm there one time, and I'm already thinking about taking some of this and changing the way. For one thing, it's 5 hours, and it's just a lot of reporting of activities. It's not value added for the employees, and it's not value added for us as board members. So I think the second thing I'd say versus external perspective is to really think about how you discuss the business of the board in a refreshing way, and maybe not in a typical agenda fashion, but tell a story. And I'm going to say, I think all the boards, these are things that we should introduce, is don't follow this typical way of doing it, but interject a little bit of, a little bit of fun and a little bit of difference, and to try to do that at each board meeting to kind of surprise people. So, anyway, those are a couple.
So I was thinking about your question about, kind of board members being super busy, and there's a social component, the human connection, adding fun, but I think there's also a component that seems almost too practical, is to really think about your meeting effectiveness. And you're working with really, really busy people, and so is there pre-read or materials that you could provide beforehand so that when you're in the meeting that it's super focused and you implement these other pieces. But I just think effectiveness of the meeting itself, and not making it 5 hours long, can you make it happen in an hour? Then there's a social component. I think that's what can keep people energized. I think it's when you're in a board that you just feel like you're talking about things that could have been shared in an email, that gets frustrating. So just thinking about that really, really practical piece of how the board itself should be run.
Just to add on to that, one board that I have worked with in the past, they have a Zoom meeting a week before the in-person board meeting, to get all of the kind of the junk reporting out, so that the board the board meeting has a spaciousness to have your kinds of conversations. And it seems to make the board meeting more meaningful.
Any other questions? Okay. Then I think we are done. If you have any other questions, or if you think of something, here's our emails. Feel free to reach out to us, and good luck in serving your communities. Thank you. Thank you.